All right, Monday, January 20th, 2025. The Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. We're interrupting your inauguration coverage for this very important Buffalo Sabres update here today on the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. As people trickle in, get the introductions out of the way. As always, I'm your co-host here on the left side. If you're watching on YouTube, Kris Baker. You can find me on X at Sabres Prospects. Haven't been tweeting much lately, but Matthew, I'm feeling refreshed, feeling re-energized, ready for the second half of the season and a little bit of a stretch run here. And of course, that person I'm just talking to is your Sabres writer for The Athletic. That is Matthew Fairburn. You can find him at Matthew Fairburn on all the social media platforms. And yeah, it's been a journey so far this season. We're going to dive into it all today. Before we begin, as folks trickle in, we are sending this out on X today as well. You can find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show audio version on Apple or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. If you could, please leave a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, like this video, hit the notification bell so you know when Matthew and I go live. And if you're watching over on X, come over to YouTube. That's where all the action is. The chat's always happening. You could talk to your peers. You could talk about the big Buffalo Bills victory yesterday on home turf against the Baltimore Ravens.
Kind of felt like home ice.
There. It did look like home ice at times, especially in the second half there. Hard for those guys to change directions. Pretty straight ahead game there in the second half. But no, it's good to be back here in the saddle. Sabres are about to begin a 4-game road trip this afternoon. So if you haven't been paying attention, it is a 4:00 Eastern time puck drop today. The Sabres are out in Seattle to take on the Kraken. Sabres had an embarrassing loss on home ice a couple Saturdays ago against the Kraken. Maybe we'll see them get a little revenge. But Matthew, as always, I like to properly tee it up. If you go back the past couple of games, right, the Sabres nearly snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, picking up a 4-2 victory over Carolina earlier last week. Scored a goal in the third period without recording a shot on goal. Thought that was kind of interesting. But then they come out and they lose in an embarrassing fashion to the Penguins on home ice, 5-2 loss. So that leaves the Sabres at 17, 23-5. Last place in the East. They're tied with Nashville for third from the bottom in the entire NHL, 6-4-1 since that 13-game winless skid. But, a 4-game road trip. We've seen the Sabres go out west previously this season and do pretty well in California. This is a trip. This is Seattle, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary that they have coming up here. I think in that order.
Calgary, Edmonton. They go to
Calgary, Edmonton. That's right. Calgary, Edmonton. That's right. They reversed it last year. They had this road trip came in March last year. On this swing, they went out. They started off in Seattle, 1-6-2. That was a top line game. Tuch scored, Thompson scored, Jeff Skinner had the hat trick. Then they go to Vancouver, tough 3-2 loss. Then they made their way over to Edmonton. And there was a big blowout loss, 8-3 to the Oilers. That is a game where UPL was in net for all 8 goals against. That is a career high goals against for UPL. Be interesting to see if they give them that start because there is a new goalie that came with the Sabres on this trip. We'll get into that in a little bit. But they did wrap up that road trip last March with a 4-1 victory over Calgary. I think you and I talked after that game, I want to say, doing this show. Sabres had a much better effort. Krebs got the first goal. Paterka scored. They had 2 late empty netters. So they went 2-2 on this swing through the Pacific Northwest last year. And it's been a tough goal, obviously, this year. Sabres have some injuries, shuffling some, player out, player in the lineup. Let's just start there, I guess. What's the state of the Sabres health-wise going into this 4-game journey that's upcoming, beginning today, 4:00 in Seattle?
Few points I want to make first. One, just got to reiterate to people, like the video on YouTube. Kris gets unbelievably cranky when we don't get enough likes. So just make sure, go over there. If you guys could only understand how cranky he gets, you got to like the video. Number 2, on the Buffalo Bills victory last night, 10-0 at home. 10 wins in Buffalo for the Bills, 9 for the Sabres this year on home ice.
Good
9,
stat.
9, 12, and 3 after that loss to the Penguins. So tough one there. But yeah, heading into this trip, they're in an interesting spot. I think this is the spot that the Sabres have thrived in the past, right? Everybody's paying attention to the Bills. They're out west, kind of out of sight, out of mind. And that seems to be when they take care of their business. Devon Levi was recalled, as you mentioned. Ryan McLeod goes to IR, which is certainly a concern given the already iffy situation at center. I would say, Tage Thompson's been playing the wing because he's playing through something. He's been in the training room a bunch. So whatever he's playing through has pushed him to the wing. Dylan Cousins had his moments on that top line playing center, but Lindy Ruff had flipped Ryan McLeod to that spot. So all of a sudden you're losing what is your de facto top line center. Not a good spot to be in, especially because he was heating up. But Yuri Kulik is getting closer to a return. So that's the flip side. And Lindy Ruff did say, this is something that we've talked about. I asked him last week about the idea of, center versus wing for Yuri Kulik. And Ruff said his gut is that this guy's a center. That's the spot that, coming out of the defensive zone in particular, he can really jumpstart the breakout. And, I think he's thrived as a center this year. So now, especially with their injury situation, I would expect when he's back in the lineup, that's where he'll be. Jordan Greenway has started skating, but is still a little ways away, it sounds like, from rejoining the team in that capacity. So that's sort of the big picture view of their injury situation. The Levi recall is interesting because we did see Luukkonen get bumped in that game on Friday against the Penguins. Evgeny Malkin was called for goaltender interference, kind of hip to the head situation. Luukkonen finished the game, but he did also have a maintenance day the day before. So he has been getting a ton of work. And with where the Sabres are right now, I had actually had Levi on my mind because I am not on this trip. And I thought it was, it was due time to get up to Rochester, see how he's doing. He got named to the All-Star game, has really, thrived down there this season with the Amherst. And given the spot in the standings, you would think getting him into some games would make some sense. So with the back-to-back, there's an obvious opportunity to get a goalie besides Luukkonen into a game. And Levi, I think, is the one you want to see at this point. The only other reason to put Reimer in, I suppose, would be to showcase him for a potential trade. But we know even if there is a suitor for Reimer, it's not going to be any sort of blockbuster return for the Sabres. So start to get Levi some more games. He's such a critical piece to the long-term outlook, even if the short-term, still looks not so pretty for the Sabres.
Yeah, Levi comes up 12-3-2 in his 17 games of action down in Rochester. 2.33 goals against, 9.13 save percentage. The goals against and his save percentage are not as good as what Topias Leinonen has been posting this year with Mora. Leinonen, by the way, currently injured. We'll see if he's on the bus tomorrow for Mora in their game. But yeah, to your point about Reimer and potentially showcasing him for a trade, I don't see it because I think you're keeping Reimer for the balance of the year at this point because Devon Levi is critically important to the success of the Rochester Americans, and they will need him down there. Get him some NHL games when you can, kind of like, call him up. But I think the long-term vision for him is deep playoff run, go as far as you can down there, got a good young core group. There's plenty of players for you to go down there and see down in Rochester, even though Levi's out west with the Sabres, whether it's Noah Ostlund, who's back, scored a goal, big goal late in the game. Just yesterday, they didn't win. Wahlberg coming back from the World Juniors. Helene is kind of cooled down. A lot of things that we can talk offline about this. A lot of ideas for you to go down there and dig around. But no, I think
I love getting down there. And I look, we talk a lot, obviously, about the Sabres on this show, and a lot of it's been negative this year because they're a major disappointment. But when you talk about finding a way out, trying to find how does this thing get fixed, can they climb their way out? it's pretty clear that what's happening in Rochester is, if there is a glimmer of hope, that is it. And that fans have heard it for far too long for it to be anything that they're really banking on. But the way they're building this, and the way that they've really kicked the can down the road, it seems like, in terms of, the patience and the long term and all this, it's certainly better than if Rochester was struggling. And the transition away from Seth Appert as coach and having a guy like Kulik up here and Kozak, there was some questions about whether Rochester could have this type of season. So really interested to see the job that Leone's done there, and to see, with so many young, players, if any of them can. I mean, Roseanne's having another great year too. So he's sort of on the cusp of maybe, figuring out whether his NHL future is legit. So there's a little bit of glimmer of hope down there, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not going to blow sunshine up anybody's ass and say, yeah, like this is, there is a way out. There's a clear path. And, but it is worth investing in the Amerks. First place in the North Division right now. They're scoring a lot of goals. They're a fun team to watch, and they have a nice balance of youth and some good veteran depth there. Josh Dunn, man, he made an amazing pass kind of through the legs to find, I think it was on Wahlberg's goal the other night. Wahlberg does what Wahlberg does. He goes right down the center lane, stick on the ice. Beautiful play. But yeah, no, they're a fun team to watch, but we are committed here to figuring this out. I mean, that's what we do. If this, I can't speak for you. Okay. But like my perspective, you hear a lot of Sabres fans chanting at the game, sell the team. This is not the podcast for that. This is the show to figure out, what are you going to do with the pieces? Who are you going to build around? You put an article out recently about trade tiers. I think that we should get into that a little bit today and talk about, because, through that conversation, you grind this down to who's worth keeping. And then you look at Rochester and say, okay, let's map out the future for some of these guys, whether it's Ostlund, who's going to need time, Wahlberg, going to need time. But I think a critical piece to the middle of the lineup. They got guys, man. They got guys that if you still care about the long term for this team, there's pieces there, especially in the middle of the lineup, where that's really important. Even if they're fourth liners win you playoff series, but we spun off on the Rochester thing because I think that's ultimately where Levi's balance of the season is mostly centered, and they do have a team down there that can go far. Levi's numbers are exceptional. Do you think he gets a start up here on one of these games? I mean, I know you mentioned Reimer, but I mean, is it realistic that we see Devon Levi in one of these games? And would you give him even the game today?
I mean, I feel like if you're going to call him up, it's to play him, right? It's not to hang out. So
I don't know,
unless there's injury insurance that you need,
right,
with Luukkonen. But again, he finished that game. It's always tricky, I guess, with a bump to the head, but he finished the game, and I don't know that you would call him up if you weren't planning to play him. So we'll see. I would expect a game at some point, whether it's today or the second half of the back-to-back against the Canucks Tuesday night. I'd like to get a look at him and see. They're taking now the more, I don't know, the more traditional or the correct path, right? That we talk about it a lot, where Kulik comes up, gets a taste, goes down, comes back up. It's the blueprint. He's more comfortable, right? He's had a little bit of a taste and then knows what to expect. Kozak, same thing. Got a few games, went back down, comes back up. He's looking pretty comfortable. Levi was in a bizarro situation where he was up. They really tried to force it. And now maybe it was the Lindy influence to hit the pause button, send him down for the second, the second time, really. It's just a deja vu of last year, where the start of the season was a little up and down and they hit the reset button. But get him a game here and there, right? Check in on the progress, see how he's doing. I don't know if danger is the right word, but the risk, right, is that he has a great game, and then what do you do, right? There's always going to be the temptation, because he is capable of stealing you a game. And then what do you do? Do you keep him around and let him ride a hot streak? And I think the best thing for him is to be a part of the winning down in Rochester. Go as deep as he can, feel what it's like to dominate, work on all the parts of his game. But I do think these little bits of action are good for him. And I think his spirit and his energy is good for this team. Like, I remember in Toronto when he got that game, talking to him after the game, that was game 10 of what ended up being a 13-game winless streak. And Devon Levi was almost oblivious, it felt like. He's like, I wouldn't know, walking in this room. He just has this positive energy about him that I think he is going to be so important. If they're ever going to climb out of this, he seems like he's going to be a big piece of that. And so getting him in here and getting a few games isn't the worst thing in the world. We'll see how they handle it. But I think a lot of people are wondering how Levi will look the next time he gets up, because I think a lot of people realize one of the ways they could really snap out of this, kind of like the second half last year, get elite goaltending. They have an elite goalie prospect. Is he ready to be an elite goalie in the NHL? Probably not, but he is. Someday he has that potential.
What are the chances that we see 3 Sabres goaltenders in this 4-game swing?
I wouldn't bet on it, but with this team, somebody getting pulled, who knows? I mean, like you mentioned, Luukkonen let up 8 in Edmonton last year, right? So anything's possible, and they're all out there. So who knows? I don't think it will happen, but I doubt that's the plan. But you never know.
I wonder if Levi, I mean, I'd like to see UPL get another crack if he's healthy at that Edmonton team. That's also kind of an interesting spot for Levi. You want to see what you got? Put him out there. But you could also expose a kid. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. The one thing that I'm looking at on this trip, we kind of already summarized how they did on the 4-game Pacific Northwest swing last year. I don't even know if you can call Calgary and Edmonton Pacific Northwest. I guess you kind of could. But a couple of years ago, I don't even think you were on the beat. Dylan Cousins had a hell of a game on McDavid in Edmonton. I don't know if the chat remembers that. That's one of the things I'm looking for. Does he get up for that matchup? Does he get up for that game? Brings me to, we talked a little bit about it last time. I've shared my thoughts on Cousins. I'm committed from my perspective to seeing it through with him. Has things changed with you? Are you still riding the Cousins bus? You've gotten a few more spins watching him at center up with Tage. Are we feeling decent about the direction with Cousins right now? I think that game in Edmonton, I guess what I'm getting at, it's a benchmark in the season. We've seen him do well, get up for that game. He's a Western Hockey League kid. This could be a trip where we've seen it with Krebs last year. We've seen it with some of these guys going back to geography that they're familiar with, and they find themselves.
Their families usually make an effort, usually on some of these trips. It's not like the Yukon is close to any of these places. It's not close to much of anywhere, but it's closer, right? And so I think they usually make a point to be there. That'll be the case for Bo Byram, who is from BC, somewhat close to Calgary, I think would be the closest of these games for his family. Krebs, Cousins in particular. So Cousins, for me, I'm not overly enthused with how he's playing still. I think there's some signs of progress, but not being able to stick on that top line. He probably, you would think, ends up back there now with McLeod down, but he's also become, it feels like, the hottest name in regards to the Sabres and trades. And through reading the tea leaves of Friedman and other people that are, LeBron reported that Calgary is real interested, or has expressed interest because they need a right-handed center. My main holdup on Cousins, and I wrote this a few weeks ago when I did that trade tiers piece, is that I don't know if you're going to get the right return, because you're opening up a massive hole in your lineup that the best version of Cousins can fill. And so the timing of dealing him when he's not playing particularly well or not having a great season on the heels of not having a great season last year, now you're in a much different bargaining position. You're desperate as a team because you're in last place. You're in year 5 as a GM. Like, other GMs can see that and sense maybe they could take advantage of you with a panic move. The fact of the matter is that the best version of Cousins is more of an asset to this team than what they could get back for him right now. What are you going to get for Dylan Cousins? And if you're not solving another problem on your current roster in a big way, then it's not a trade worth making. Would I be hanging up the phone at the mere mention of his name? Absolutely not. We can get into it, but there's not that many players. There might just be one that I'm not even having the conversation. Other than that, I'm listening. And if there's somebody that wants Dylan Cousins badly enough to make it worth your while, okay. But who's going to want him? Probably a team that's in contention. And so are they going to trade off a major piece? Saw Colorado kind of do it last year with a hockey type trade, Middlestat for Byram, right? Byram, not quite a win now piece, but I mean, he was a part of what they were doing. They felt like their problem at center was bigger than their problem on defense, so they got rid of him. But that would be the only way you think about it. But even then, that seems like it's going to be a fine line to walk, as Kevin Adams.
20 minutes into the podcast, if you could please hit that like button. If you're watching the show on YouTube, Matthew Fairburn is accepting your questions for a Buffalo Sabres mailbag at The Athletic. I don't know if you're aware of that, Matthew, but I just went over to the site and they are accepting questions.
Indeed.
So I see some questions in the chat. If we don't get to any of your questions today, we might not. If we don't get to it today, send it over to Matthew and he'll address it, I'm sure, in his Buffalo Sabres mailbag at The Athletic. You can get The Athletic, I think, for $1 a week right now. I think that's the deal, by the way. And tell your bosses that I keep pumping The Athletic's tires, Matthew, and give me a little, little action. Free subscription. At any rate, let's get into your trade tiers. That's why I brought up The Athletic. I don't have it up yet, but let's just start real high with the untouchables on your list. I don't have many. I don't have many untouchables.
I've got one. I've got one truly untouchable, and it's Rasmus Dahlin, just because I don't think you want to go down that road. I really don't. I think, with the Jack Eichel thing was a totally, different situation. There were a lot of complicating factors to that. But trading a young, super high draft pick, established star player who is the captain of your team is a very difficult trade to win. The reason Rasmus Dahlin is untouchable is not because, it's not because there's something worth preserving with the current Sabres. Like, obviously, I understand the people who say nobody should be untouchable. This isn't working, but I think that's too much emotional. That's too emotionally led. Rationally, when you take a step back and think, how would the Sabres win a Rasmus Dahlin trade? I can't think of how that would even be possible. Are you going to get a player better than Rasmus Dahlin in that deal? It's going to be hard to
player you trade at the deadline. You know what I mean?
No,
anyways.
certainly not.
That's a blockbuster off-season deal. But no, to your point, it would be completely just deleterious to trade your captain again, period. End of story.
Already signed by everything I can gather, still fully embracing his role, not only as captain, but as somebody who can fix this. Like, that seems to matter to him. I mean, he signed on the dotted line for, a super long, contract for a ton of money. To me, that's just, you're not even entertaining that. Next on my list.
Yeah.
You want to keep going on Dahlin?
No, I wanted to jump to a totally different player as opposed to going through the list maybe systematically real quick, because I think you had a chance to talk, because I think the most compelling name, it's not Cousins, It's not like Owen Power. These are, again, I'm looking at the deadline versus the potential of re-signing a player like a Jason Zucker. I wanted to go there immediately. You had a chance to catch up with Zucker. Crazy compelling. I know I'm probably taking you out of sequence of how you wanted to go through the list, but I just wanted to get right to it. Because where does he fit on your trade tiers? Let's just bounce around a little bit, because I think that one is super interesting.
So the way I broke it down was, which unrestricted free agents are there? Which ones have value and which ones are more, in the Reimer bucket, right? Where there's not much value there, but maybe somebody would take a flyer. Zucker clearly has value. I think quite a bit of it. The way I broke it down was, if this guy wants to sign, I think you try to find a way to keep him. If he doesn't, then you owe it to yourself and to your team to get the maximum possible return. When I talked to him last week and brought up the idea of a contract, because as of January 1st, he was eligible to re-sign as a player on a 1-year deal. He said he would love it. Now, I will start with the caveat, because I know there will be people in the chat that say this. I understand that he's probably not going to say the opposite, right? He's not going to say, get rid of me, to me, right? He might say it to Kevin, but he's probably not going to say it to me on the record. I get that. But the tone and sort of the flow of our conversation, that answer is different than I'll cross that bridge when I get to it, or that's between my agent and Kevin. There are other ways to answer the question that would have me walking away from the conversation thinking, this guy kind of wants out of here. You felt that with Erik Johnson. Even Kyle Okposo this time last year was sort of like already plotting his exit from the Sabres. Zucker is one of the most energetic and upbeat guys on the ice. Practice, game, just really bringing a lot of enthusiasm. Likes being a leader, right? He's not been in that position quite like this with a young team too often. And so now he's really liking that. And he's also super productive. One of the things he talked about that I thought was really interesting and self-aware was that he fits this system really well. He didn't feel like he fit the system in Arizona really well. And so this summer, a lot of his decision-making was built around that. Where will I
And it's
fit?
more of like a forechecking system.
Exactly. He likes to forecheck. He's fast. He likes to play the game fast, not necessarily do a lot of too much thinking like he felt like he did in Arizona. So I think he is open to the idea of playing here. There's another piece of this too, Kris. Where's the money, right? Where's the money going to come from? And I think Buffalo, he recognizes now that he's sitting on a $5 million, annual salary, is a place where he could make some money. And so all of those factors lead me to believe that's an avenue that they can explore. Will they get something done? I don't know. Is he as open to it as he let on? I don't know. But I can tell you the door seems cracked open at the very least. And I think the Sabres should think about bringing him back, because if they don't, even if they do bring him back, the conversation this summer is going to be about how the youngest team in the NHL gets more experience. How does how do they round out this roster? If you lose Jason Zucker, that's just another experience piece that you need to replace. They need more Jason Zuckers, not fewer. So getting rid of him, if he's open to signing, doesn't make a lot of sense. If contracts talks stall, if he sits there and says, yeah, I'm open to re-signing at, some ridiculous number or term, and it doesn't make sense, okay. But we know cap space isn't a huge issue. And we know that they need more experience, not less. He is an important guy, on and off the ice for this team right now. So finding a way to bring him back, I think, would be pretty cool. I think it would be a sign that you have, all this talk about guys don't want to come here. We can't get free agents, no trade clauses. Retaining a guy like that might be a nice morale booster to the guys around the room, the younger guys. And they look up to this guy. There's a lot of guys that I think see what he's doing. And it's different than Kyle Okposo because he's producing. He's helping their
Yeah.
power play, right?
I was gonna say
not
27th in the league. They'd be dead last without Jason Zucker.
he's not
Power play.
he's not, wearing a letter, but he is pretty important in that regard. So he's an interesting one. He and Jordan Greenway maybe in a little bit of a different bucket because he hasn't been playing. And I haven't had a chance to talk to Jordan for a while, so I don't know where he might stand on all this yet. But those two guys both play, Greenway was playing well when he was healthy. And,
Yes, he
they're
was.
some of the more experienced guys who have played in playoff games. So I do wonder a lot of interesting decisions, but the UFA decisions are the most interesting to me because you're in last place in the Eastern Conference, right? You are in the position of a seller. But nobody thinks you should be selling for futures and parts at this point, right? Like just collecting assets for the sake of it. You should be doing everything you can to try to make sure that you're competitive next season and getting rid of a couple of veterans when you have such trouble attracting them in the first place doesn't seem like it puts you closer to that goal.
Man, am I so happy I just jumped right in and asked you about Zucker. You see the big smile on my face? There was a little flame kind of smoldering, and I feel like I just dropped a little bit of gasoline on Matthew Fairburn, and you got fired up, man, talking about Zucker just now, and I think for good reason, because he has had look, the Sabres are what they are in the standings right now. They've been a massive disappointment all year long. I get it. Couple things on Zucker, though. He has been good here. He's proven himself to me. I was like, oh, really? I was, you know what I mean? I wasn't all the way there. I was like, okay, they got him. Let's see what he does, right? He's having fun playing here. Smile on his face, infectious attitude. Guy scores a goal, fired up, more fired up than you were just now when he goes to the bench.
I see it at practice too, man. This guy's like he's 32 years old, but he might as well be, 16 playing with his buddies. Like he
Because we're
brings
all just
that
kids, man.
every day.
Yeah.
And that's what I asked him about that and he's like, look, man, like I'm playing hockey he's like, it's not to downplay the situation we're in. It's not a good situation, right? They're in last place. They're trying to figure out their process. They're trying to climb out of it. But he said, I can recognize that and still bring a positive attitude because the opposite is not going to help. And I think that's the perspective that comes with time. He's also 32 years old. I actually just turned 33 at the end of last week. And, he's like, I got beautiful family that supports me, great kids. He's like, and I'm playing a game for a living. Like there's a lot of reasons for me to be having fun out there. And I think losing a guy like that, it feels like it would be tough for the locker room. Like last year, there was some element of, I would almost say, relief after the deadline, for these guys
Oh,
when
yeah.
Poso and Johnson were gone because it was kind of hanging over them of like, what's going to happen with these veterans that really aren't all in. And whether Zucker, this is another piece of the conversation that I appreciated about Zucker. Regardless, right? He's like, hey, if Kevin decides, that it's in the best interest to trade me. Like this is a business. I was part of it last year. It happens. But the big thing he was talking about was like other guys in the room are looking at him and how he handles it. And so he's like being present and enjoying everything here and being all in on trying to fix this. Like he owes it to those guys as long as he's here. If Kevin makes a different decision, that is what it is. And he'll bring that to his next team. But while he's here, he recognizes that it's not just about what he says to guys, right? He doesn't need to go up to Jack Quinn and tell him he's all in. He needs to show him. And I don't think they got that last year from Kyle Okposo.
No.
I don't think they got that from Eric Johnson. I think both of those guys partway through the year were, wandering eyes, right? Where can I go chase something? And I don't take this either as, oh, Jason Zucker doesn't care about winning. I don't think that either because I think anybody who watches him can see, like you said, the enthusiasm he plays with, the energy he brings, energy that frankly they need more of, energy that so many of these guys have not seen nearly enough of in their careers. And he's still got some game left in him.
Dude, I look at some of the veterans that the Sabres organization has brought in, maybe in the past, I don't know how many years to measure it by, but I go back to like Gianta, who by the way was a warrior, you know what I mean? Like standing in front of Harrington and some of your peers. I think that was even pre-athletic, honestly, after every game. But it's a different impact, I think, that Zucker has had on the group. And again, I understand that it hasn't led to this ascension in the standings. I totally get it. Back to his comment about what he said to you, that he would love it. As a journalist, you have to have a bullshit detector. It didn't go off, did it? When he said that to you. Now, I'm not putting you on the
It
spot
didn't.
because
It
maybe
didn't.
right? Like, yeah.
And again, I'm not sitting here saying like that because it didn't go off means that there isn't any hint of that, right? Like I said, this is my first
You know
season
when
covering
someone's
Jason
being
Zucker,
genuine though.
but yeah, I mean, to say I'd love it, right? Yeah, we can read the quote too to give people the full, you know. I think the other important context here too is that Jason Zucker has bounced around the last few years, right? Like he has played for a few different teams, and he's not, he doesn't love it, right? He's likes the
Yeah.
idea of some stability and playing in one place. And like I said, I'm sure there's financial motivation too. He said, I would love it. Right now, that's not something that is in my control. For me personally, it's something I would be very interested in. If that time comes, we can have that conversation. So two pieces of that is that they haven't had the conversation as of last
That's
week,
where I
which
was going after this.
is
Okay.
that's a little bit of a concern because he's been eligible since January 1. And even before that, you would think you'd want to kind of check in and be like, hey, this is working really well. Like,
When did you talk to him? Let's set the timeline real quick. Was it around the 10th? Was it like the 8th to the 10th?
the story published on the 15th, which means I talked to him. Yeah, it sounds about right. Last Tuesday, the 14th, I believe.
Okay.
Um,
Kevin,
so
what are you waiting for? Seriously.
right. That was
What are
2
you waiting
weeks
for?
after he was eligible. At least you wanna check in, I would think, right? But the 2 lines, I'd love it, something I'd be very interested in. That that's putting it on real heavy if
That's
you're
on the record.
right? It's putting it on that's laying it on a little thick if you're bullshitting, I think.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
said, "Oh, yeah, I'd be open to it. We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it." This was a little bit different than that, a little bit stronger, and just the way he was talking about the team, how he fit, his role. I got the sense that there was, and of course, like I said, there's some context, I'm sure, to it, right? I would love it for the right price. You have to you got to fill in the blanks, right? Like
Yeah.
uh, you have to fill in the omissions. Yeah. Like, probably what he's thinking in his head. He's not going to take a hometown discount or anything. He's not, um, he's not from West Seneca, right? This is not the lifelong dream to play for the Sabres and he's going to take a discount, but he's making $5 million, maybe a modest raise on that, maybe an extra year. You probably still have to pay the Buffalo tax a little bit, but this is something that it was a development I wasn't sure about. We've talked a little bit about Zucker. Would he be interested in re-signing? Just felt like you want to get something directly from the guy, right? And kind of see what he really thinks about it. And that was a pretty strong, emphatic answer, I thought, as far as um, just comparing it to recent seasons, Okposo and Eric Johnson, what it sounded like when guys didn't want that. And the diplomacy, the uncomfortableness, there was no hesitation when I asked Zucker. So we'll see where that all leads. But yeah, the point about that they haven't had the conversation. Now a week has passed. I would hope there was at least a check-in, when they saw those comments and be like, hey, all right, what's the ballpark here? But until there's pen to paper, his name will be out there around trade deadline time. He is the absolute classic rental buy for a playoff team. I mean, who wouldn't want an experienced winger who drives the net, and forechecks the way that he does and can play a two-way game. I mean, that is the type of player you want in the playoffs, which again, if you want him in the playoffs, if he's a playoff type player and the Sabres want to get there, that I think is the ultimate reason to keep him, is all these teams that are calling because once you get to that point, you're going to want a player like him. So the other thing I will say too, before kicking it back to you, I've seen some people say, well, trade him, get something, and bring him back in the summer. And
once you let him out of the building, you're going to tell me what you're going to say what you told me before because I said the same thing a couple weeks ago. Go ahead. I'll shut up.
I just think you can't especially the position you're in as an organization, you cannot let like once he's gone, right? The idea that first of all, that doesn't happen that much, period, in sports. The idea is nice. Oh, handshake deal, tell Zucker, we'll see you in July. But once he's out of here, once he tastes something else, once, maybe that other team wants to keep him, once he hits the market, all these things that could, if he's in your building and he's willing to stay in your building, you got to keep him in your building because things are better in other buildings, right? Things are better, frankly. Ask the long list of players who have left. And this guy's making your building a little bit better. Despite, the team struggles, he is not hurting your situation. So I wouldn't let him out. And it might even be worth the gamble to me. Contract talks aren't always there. This is what you have to do as a GM. This is what you have to do in these situations is weigh risk reward and get a gauge before the deadline. Where are these contract talks really? Because certainly, Jason Zucker, how he speaks to me will be different than how he speaks to his agent and Kevin Adams about the situation. And so Kevin Adams needs to have his detector on to say, do we have a legit chance? And weigh the risk reward versus whatever is out there on the market. Now, if you're talking a first round pick, that's where it gets interesting. I don't know if the price gets that high.
That's where I was going. I just brought up Dallas's roster. I'm just looking at it. I'm saying, wow, you know what? I could see Zucker playing for a team like Dallas on this roster that I'm looking at here. That's where I'll give Kevin the benefit of the doubt. I just asked 5 minutes ago. I said, Kevin, what are you waiting for? If he thinks, as crazy as it sounds, that he could get a first, does that make it like, would you rather re-sign him, Zucker, or do you take the first round draft pick on the assumption that it's a team that's going to be in the final, like it's going to be 29 to 32? Tough one. It's tough. You don't have to answer. Maybe what I mean?
It changes the calculus a little bit. I'll give you that. But what are you doing with that first round pick? You're probably trying to trade it.
So,
right?
Yes.
Use it in a package to get somebody who can play on your top line, top second line, maybe. A late first round pick. What's it going to get you? Are you going to use the pick? Is it going to be Yuri Kulik, or is it going to be, the long list of players picked in that range who didn't work out? How long will it take for that player to work out? Or are you trading it for a player that can basically replace Zucker, right? It's another piece. And I get that he's getting up there in age. Like a first round pick would probably be tempting. And maybe you would think about that, but
I don't. You know what? I think that you have to sign Zucker right now, because if you're paying him for what he's going to do, you don't pay the player for what he's done. You pay him for what he's going to do. And I think his value to the organization, everything that we just talked about for, 10, 15 minutes on Zucker, is more valuable than getting another piece that you're going to have to wait a couple of years for, or trading to replace that Zucker veteran leadership, enthusiasm, energy. And I've completely changed course on Zucker from where I was to start the year. I see the value in it. I guess what I was saying is, if Kevin thinks that he can, he has to get in negotiations, get the number, get the term, he's not going to get more than a 2-year deal. Does he get a series of 1-year deals at this point? I don't know. Right. But it's better. And you can always trade Zucker next year.
There's nothing stopping you from trading him down the road. If whatever reason,
I don't think that I would move him even for a late first round pick this year.
I mean, you don't
got plenty of prospects right now, man. Build the infrastructure around the young players that you have to develop now.
You don't need more work. Your hard drive's running out of space as it is. They don't need another first round pick. But it also just comes down to, okay, collecting if we're in a situation where Zucker did not want to sign, and the best offer on the table is a second-round pick, and he's like adamant that he will not be signing, you take the second-round pick and you figure out what to do with it later, right? You try to trade it for somebody. That's just basic business in pro sports. But when you have a guy that has at least a level of interest, it's not zero, then you have to think about, look at all these picks that you already have, assets you already have, prospects that are already in the system, and wonder, why can't you use some of what you already have? If you really need, they have all the assets they need to put together a package that could make become a trade that's a useful piece to the top six or a playing partner for Owen Power. They're not short on pieces, right? When the Bills started their rebuild, Brandon Beane was selling stuff off because he knew he needed picks to eventually move up and get a quarterback. He knew he needed these assets to have the flexibility and freedom that he wanted to build the team that he knew they needed. They have all the assets here. They've already done that part. They did that with Eichel, with Reinhart. This is not a situation where they need another asset, another future. So that's where I think outsiders will look at the situation and see a veteran player that can help a playoff team and see a team in last place and put 2 and 2 together and say he's an easy rental dump. But it's just not that simple, I think, for the Sabres. And there's a lot of things that make it complicated for them, including probably at the top of the list that they do have trouble getting these types of players. They have trouble not just getting them, but hitting on them, right? They hit a home run on this one. They should want to reward that and show the guys in the room how they reward it, right?
Well, yeah, and several Fridays ago, Kevin Adams was in front of the assembled media. It was that fateful Friday. There were some comments, right, that led to some Hawaiian shirts being donned at the arena, and there was some negative feedback from the nationwide hockey press, continental wide. Canadian media jumped on it too. I think re-signing Zucker could be a good bit of PR work for Kevin Adams right now. Like, let's not lose sight of that. Also has a lot of meaning, I think, for him. Yeah, not me. I'm right there with you, man.
A lot can happen in a month and a half. His attitude can change in a month and a half. I don't think his play or his attitude, on the ice or within the room will change, but a lot can happen in 6 weeks. I mean,
capture that energy, man. Capture that energy. He's feeling good in a down year. Can you imagine what the impact Jason Zucker would have on this young group if they actually have some success next year? Kyle Okposo, I'm not going to beat the guy up. He did a lot of good here. You know what I mean? But you know what? You knew he was going to quit on the Sabres if he had a chance to. He did it to his University of Minnesota teammates when he was in college. Left that team in December. I don't get the same, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, capture this energy with a veteran guy here now. All right. I'm Zuckered out. We agree. Glad I asked you about that. Glad I stepped on you.
Yeah, I almost forgot about it. Yeah, because
you were going to talk about Tage, and you were going to go with all this other shit. Right. Who's the guy?
We're going to talk about Owen Power again. Going to talk. We've talked about these guys, but Zucker is a different case.
Someone said talk about the draft real quick. Here's my real big take on the draft, and I'm going to ask you, and I'll give you some time to think about this. I'm going to ask you who the most likely guy to get traded is. Okay, the draft though, real quick. You're in the Porter Martone zone all day long. You could actually talk me into moving Cousins if you get Porter Martone in the system, okay? If you trade Owen Power or even Bowen Byram, you start to think about Schaefer. Okay, and I'm going to stop there. That's where my head's at going in this draft. I've spent a lot of time the past week. I've got a lot of draft video. I'm thinking about how to use it on this channel. And we'll talk about that. I like this Aiden Lane kid, by the way, up in the OHL. One of these kids that went to the OHL from prep. Not a big kid, but man, he's always at the net. You're talking about Jason Zucker. He's like an 18-year-old Jason Zucker. Anyways, you look at these guys. I have a player that, I liked when Quinn and Benson were opposite each other. And the problem that I had with them was Peyton Krebs in the middle. It didn't feel right. I'm not against Krebs. I think he's got value. Do you think that he's like the most likely to get dealt here of the the Greenways, Yogi Haryu's, or who is your player? Well, I set you up to not succeed because now you're going to say, well, Yogi Haryu, right-handed defenseman. Who do you think is the most likely to get dealt? And do you think Peyton Krebs is a guy that gets moved out, especially as, maybe Yuri Kulik keeps kind of showing that he's already ahead of him?
Krebs is such an interesting case to me because you're always downloading information in this job and, taking in your surroundings, having conversations, trying to learn as much as you can about the people, that are in that room. And Peyton Krebs to me always has felt like a guy that like this guy more as much as anybody in there is just like wants to win, likes it here. These are not traits alone that would cause you to keep a guy, but giving him a clear role and a chance to grow into it, it just feels like he can be a small piece. I think the dreams of him being, this major piece to the puzzle, are probably on the shelf, right? The idea that because he was in the Eichel trade, he was going to be a game breaker, top 6 player, and the playmaking from the WHL was going to translate. He put up all these points. I don't know if that's in his future at this point, but as he matures physically, and keeps getting stronger, theoretically, I don't know how close he is to topping out in that regard. The attitude, I feel like, is one that, might be worth keeping around. I could see them getting calls on him for that reason, though, right? Because he is so competitive and because he has started to fill this sort of smaller role that teams are looking for a little bit more of, the winger center versatility, the cheap contract. On my trade tiers, I have him under affordable depth, under team control. Like that's a nice, nice little asset. But I'm not married to the idea of keeping him. I just like what he's brought off the ice. And I think on the ice in a tricky situation, playing both center and wing, playing with different line mates all the time, he's had some decent results. He's not scoring a bunch.
He's another one of these young players that hasn't been set up to succeed by the organization.
Right.
Let's not lose sight of that. I think with Krebs, let's look at his timeline throughout the year, right? Coming into the season, he was kind of like that odd guy out. The Sabres went out and got Kubel, and they went out and got Lafferty, and they traded for Beck Muhlenstein. And then you didn't know where Krebs fit. And he's exceeded expectations in that regard this season. In the big picture, though, he hasn't met the expectations of who we thought. That's what you're saying. That's what makes it hard for me. I like Krebs. Another guy, I like his energy. I like his compete. In a season where you've seen the Sabres not defend the colors of the uniform enough, he's been one of the guys that consistently is out there. He and Benson.
Yeah, I don't know if Benson's untouchable, but he's pretty damn close. Like I can't see a trade that makes sense too much for Benson. And that's a hard pivot from Krebs, but similar vein, right? Because of the competitiveness and because of thinking about what he could become. Think about all the opportunities that he's gotten, that when he figures out how to bury some of them, the points could be there. He's at the net front. He's competitive as hell. Like we have said, when you're in a situation like this, when you're listening to everything, right? If you get somebody knocks your socks off with a ready-made top 6 player for Benson, you have to think about it. But Benson feels like he could be a really, really good player for this team. He's one of the guys on the team. I would say Zucker, I would say Byram, Benson, Kulik. Those are guys that have sort of exceeded my expectations this year. And, I think Dahlin's having a really good year. I think Tage, when he's been healthy, has been closer to what you expected. Tuch is in that bucket as well. But as far as outside of that, there's been a lot of guys that really haven't exceeded expectations or even lived up to the high expectations that you have for them. Benson, I think, has. And I think you have to look beyond the points to see it. But I know the points do matter when you're playing that high in the lineup, but this is a guy that should be part of the solution. Again, are you going to win it? How are you going to win that trade?
You're not. No, like
bring me a
talking about
proposal that you're going to win, and I'll think about it. But I just don't think you're going to win that trade.
in whatever version of a blockbuster that the Sabres could make. That's the only way that you have any notion of trading a Zach Benson, right? Like, and he might not even be like a superstar in the NHL, but I'll tell you what, he's going to be a superstar prick in the NHL, no doubt about it. And for that
he
alone,
almost already is.
he becomes an untouchable because of the fact that he's like a little prick, and he's only going to get better, you know? So no, I don't even know why that even enters the equation right now. It has to be like talking about Benson right now. It's like, oh, I'm going in for wrist surgery. Oh, we're going to cut this toe off over here. Like there's no sense in talking about Benson. You know what I mean? But so if you look at the roster though, if on the assumption that Kevyn Adams is going to make a trade of someone in the organization, it could be someone in Rochester, but let's face it, I think there's plenty of things to address on the top club roster right now. Do you have a feel for who, big or small, is it an Obeku Bell for someone who, he's got playoff experience and he would add depth to someone? Is it an expiring contract? What's your gut? I'm not going to hold you to it. Just kind of where are you at?
It's tough to get a read because unlike last year, it was pretty easy to forecast, right? Who you get rid of. And even Middlestat, we were talking about in the fall because, of how the roster was put together, the contract stalemate. That trade looks pretty good right now, I think, depending on what happens with Byram, right? If you can't, last I spoke to Byram, he was certainly open to the idea of being in Buffalo long term, but that's a much different context than Jason Zucker, right? Because he is going to be looking for, that's just a complicated contract. Right? He is going to be looking for some big money. And so that's where, that's a guy I want to keep, first of all. But I guess my point being, is there a Middlestat on this roster right now that you would think they could make a hockey trade like that with? And maybe you would go to like Jack Quinn, but Jack Quinn's not having a career year the way Middlestat was last year, and you're sort of selling high. Peterka's an RFA. That is actually a conversation. Peterka falls into the Owen Power bucket for me of I'm listening, right? I'm listening because
that's the hockey trade. It's Power and Peterka.
Hockey trades, right? I'm listening for a couple of reasons. Because if you're calling about Peterka, okay, we're talking about a big trade, right? Like,
yeah.
And he's producing. He's not having a great year, but he's producing again. He's an RFA, so that contract, is definitely going to cost you something. And he would get you something back, right? You could solve a problem potentially with a deal like that. I'm not giving them away. I'm not shopping them, but I'm listening. If somebody's serious about making a legit. Now, we should also say, your initial question of like what happens in the next month, who are they actually going to move? A lot of what we're talking about makes more sense in the summer. Most of what we're talking about. Zucker,
well, that's kind of where I'm at for this whole season right now. And I said this about a month ago. I said, look, let's get ready for free agency.
That's
what I told you offline.
It has to be.
Go ahead.
It has to be because like 1% chance at the playoffs, according to the Athletics model right now. Like it is very slim chance. So it has to be about the summer. And all of these decisions are related, right? Zucker, are you going to use some of that money, some of that cap space? If you don't bring Zucker back, that's more money you have that goes around to other guys. All of these decisions are tied together. But I preface that like a Peterka thing at the deadline seems like it would be. And the reason I say that is a contender would want Peterka. And you're not doing futures, right? If you're listening on Peterka, you're listening because you have a chance to make your NHL roster better. Same thing we said about Owen Power. Again, these are players. Peterka is a player I like. I know you like him. This is a guy that would get you something back. And it's the same reason I would listen on Power. Same reason I'm listening on Cousins, but not eager because you're not selling as high as you would be on Peterka or Power. Even though Peterka and Power haven't exactly had the seasons everybody hoped for, I still think you're selling higher than you are on Cousins or Quinn or the other name people like to throw in that bucket, Matthias Samuelson. You're selling real low if you do that one. But Peterka and Power are in that different bucket where, like, I could see you solving some of your problems, making your roster better in a different area in a hockey trade involving one of those guys.
Power play has been kind of, down in the dumps most of the year, right? Well, all year. Let's face it. With Byram, let's go back to Byram real quick. Why would you not go Dahlin, Byram, PP1 for an extended stretch of games if it helps you articulate like what the clear picture is with Byram's offensive upside?
Because you've seen Byram on PP2 or putting him with Dahlin on PP1?
With Dahlin on PP1. Because I don't think we've seen that. And if we have, it was very short window of time. Then you have a better sense. Like, I guess what I'm saying, your power play's 27th in the league. It's been in the bottom 5 to 7 ranked power play all season long. You haven't tried that. You have them out there at even strength. To get a better idea, I think, of what does it look like with a 2D power play 1. You got Jack Quinn up there. Jack Quinn's had a horrible season. Let's face it, right? Little bits here and there. Like, what are you doing? I guess I'm trying to I'm already setting it up for negotiating the contract. Power play is important in the NHL. It's huge.
Well,
and yours is
so many points come from.
Right.
Here's a wild stat from Friday is that Owen Power got his first power play point of the season. So your power play is not good. And Power got some time on the top unit because Dahlin's missed some games. Like, this guy's had opportunity. I know he's got the potential to be excellent on the power play. So far this season, he's not, right? So if you're thinking about keeping Byram as a big piece, like Byram is sitting there negotiating this contract. It's kind of what made the Owen Power contract a little bit tricky is that I know talking to, people around the league about that at the time was like, well, he is not your number one defenseman, but he's going to want to be paid like a number one defenseman because he's a number one overall pick. He produces points, all those things. I'm looking at Owen Byram and I'm thinking on another team, he's getting power play time. And look at the way he's producing at even strength. He's playing on your top pair. So how that
I'd like to see it to help the negotiation for both sides, really.
Right.
I think that's what Byram wants.
Get some information. That might be more important than the money in some ways is what is the role, right? Where, and especially it's kind of funny thinking back to when they first got him. You remember it kind of went viral of him trying to move people around on the power play.
He was these guys are just standing here in cement. Yeah, he was directing traffic. His first game was it Nashville?
I think it was Nashville was his first game. I can't remember if it was that game or the second one that he was moving people around and I don't know, you can't have a guy as untouchable when he's an RFA and the contract stuff makes it potentially messy. But that's a guy I want in the room. Won a cup. He is, it was funny when they traded for him. He's obviously tight with Dylan Cousins, right? And he's known Peyton Krebs a long time. So it's like, oh, this guy's going to be comfortable here because he's got these friends. And now getting to know Bo Byram, it's like he's going to be comfortable here because he's Bo Byram. He's just that guy. Guys really like him. Guys gravitate to him. And he's got that loose personality. He keeps guys laughing. He's he hates losing. Anytime we've talked to him after a loss, it's like a completely different guy. But I used to think it was the Cousins factor was super important. And it's not unimportant, right? I'm sure he likes having Cousins and Krebs around. But this is a guy that is, I imagine he's got a lot of friends around the league, guys he's played with. People like this guy, and he is a pretty strong leader in that room, even at such a young age. not a guy I'd be interested in trading. And to your point about giving him some power play time or giving him, like, I would be interested in showing him in any way possible what the future could look like here and why it makes sense for him to sign long term
Kind of where
here.
I'm going with the PP. Yeah.
Because he is, it's kind of similar to the Benson thing, right? Like, you don't want to get rid of guys like that, especially the way he's playing and the age he's at. You want, again, kind of like Zucker, you won, right? You won that trade with Middlestat so far, I think, the way
And
Middlestat.
Zucker wants to be here, not just because of the money, and he's got, it's the bird in the hand thing. He's on your top line right now. He's on your one. He wants to play too, So now that was my random thought on Byram, was just like, I want to see him there. What do you have to lose? What, just because half the league doesn't go 2D on their power play, or, more than half, basically 90% of the league doesn't go 2D on their power play? Is that why you won't do it? Give me a break. Put your best guys out there. And I think right now he's probably one of them.
Let him, quarterback number 2. Maybe see what that looks like. The idea of putting him up top, though, I kind of like, because, again, what do you have to lose, right? You got the 27th ranked power play in the NHL. Your team, you got to be about finding. You can't be all about 2025, 26, but you have to be thinking that way with a lot of what you're doing, whether it's Levi, whether it's Byram, some of these different little pieces that you're trying to figure out where everything fits together, like Quinn, Cousins, Samuelson. You want to get these guys going. And then if you can get them going, talk in the summer and see what the trade value is like, right? Like, at the deadline, there's a deadline for other teams. There's not a deadline really for the Sabres.
No, there's not.
Other than with Zucker and with Greenway, there's
Henry,
a time crunch there. And Henry, Reimer, I guess, if you want to throw him in that bucket.
Sure.
But there's not now, the other deadline that perhaps Kevin Adams could be dealing with is what, his conversation with Terry Pegula is like at the end of the season, right? That once Bill's season is over and Terry has a closer eye on the Sabres, that could be something that's factoring in. But, Kevin Adams is not going to be like rushing to make moves, because of his job. I don't think he's really in that frame of mind. And frankly, it feels like Terry Pegula would have to sign off on any of them anyways, right? These big splashy deals. So that I'm not thinking too much about, but don't operate like you have some sort of hard and fast deadline. Like, if you don't, most of the guys we're talking about shaking up a core. Most of them are under team control. So in the summer, you're a lot better off dealing Cousins if he goes on a hot streak at the end of the season, or Jack Quinn if he starts scoring a bunch. One thing that weirdly benefits the Sabres in a strange way is, even though some of these guys are struggling, I think the Sabres have developed a reputation around the league that, well, once we get them out of Buffalo, they'll be all right. Right.
Yeah. It facilitates trades.
Like, I think, Jack Quinn, people would look at and be like, well, that's Buffalo once we get him out of there. Now, how much does that help, the value? I don't know, but I think it's different than if they were struggling somewhere else, because Buffalo has really developed a reputation in that regard. But that's not something you want to be rushing into, as far as, look, if you were going to rush into making one of those moves, you do it when you still had a chance to save your season.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I agree.
So far, they've done nothing to the roster all season.
So one last name I want to ask you about. Hey, by the way, we're over an hour in. If you haven't hit that like button, please do so. You heard Matthew earlier. I get grumpy. I want to have a good day. It's a holiday. I want to have a good day. Do me a favor. Hit that like button if you could. Matthew, instead of going through the entire list, and folks in the chat or whoever's listening to this, after we're done live here, you can go and read Matthew's article on The Athletic. You have to page through it, because I think he's had a few other pieces that have come out since then on his different trade tiers for the Sabres roster. Well-constructed article. Well done. Props, Matthew. Alex Tuch.
That's a good one.
Where is Alex Tuch on your list? I was gonna do like a little like match game earlier. I was looking for a piece of paper, but I don't have one nearby. I have my really nice stationery because I'm still old school. I still write letters. Okay, but I'm not wasting a piece of it. I was gonna write down the percentage that I thought that Alex Tuch gets dealt. But let's just talk about Tuch. Let's just have the dialogue. Where was he on your list?
So I had a section of players that I labeled not signed long term, but potential long term pieces. There were 3 players on the list: Bo Byram, JJ Peterka, and Alex Tuch. I put Alex Tuch in basically the same bucket as those guys because while Peterka and Byram are upcoming RFAs, Tuch has 1 year left after this and then is a UFA. So I put them in kind of the similar team control type of bucket, right? Like you have team control, but you have to be thinking beyond, just the immediate control. I wrote a column around this time last year that Alex Tuch should be untouchable. And I have changed my stance on that slightly. My reasoning last year was that I didn't like the message it would send in so many different ways. Not only the player Tuch is, but I just hated the idea that you're going to wave the white flag on a key piece, not just a key piece of the Eichel trade, but a guy that was really enthusiastic about being in Buffalo, a guy that's popular among his peers in the league. If you can't make that guy happy in Buffalo, oh boy, right? Like, who can you keep happy? Especially so quick after you traded for him, it just did not make sense. I understood why teams would call. He's got a great contract. He's a guy whose game should be, really good in the playoffs. Now, I think I've softened on it a little bit just because another year has passed, right? You're a little bit more removed from that. And it's quite clear that this core has not worked. The other piece is that he's 1 step closer, 1 year closer to UFA status. He will be eligible for an extension this summer. And that is sort of the backdrop of all these conversations about all of these players. How do they feel? How does Alex Tuch feel about riding this out? Because the way he has played, his last contract was a big one, right? Like he became a wealthy man, $4.75 million a year. Like he's not hurting. That goes a pretty long way in Western New York. I wouldn't know. It's significantly more than I make, but I assume it goes a long way. But the next contract is sort of his big chance, right? He is, I believe, 28 years old right now. Mm-hmm. He will be, when does he turn 29? He turns 29 in May, which means he'll be 30 when he would theoretically be hitting unrestricted
when his next
free
deal kicks in, right? Yeah.
So he would get a good free agent deal, but I think his best chance of hitting pay dirt is here. Get a real healthy number, little
the
extra
same conversation
turn.
as Zucker too, like in terms of age, experience, if he wants to be here and see it through. And
if he wants to be here and see it through, it's a no-brainer.
Okay.
You keep him.
Okay.
Because again, I think the type of trade you're talking about there is, a young player and a first rounder or, whatever. You're just creating a massive hole.
Yeah.
If you get rid of him.
Hell of a penalty killer.
Great penalty killer. Great, details away from the puck, in the defensive zone. And we've seen some scoring upside from him.
Can we put a bonus in his next contract? I don't think he can do this for a certain amount of shot attempts that need to hit the net.
Right. Yes. He misses the net a lot. It's like you can just bank on it. It's like I can see it in my head. He's breaking down the right wing and he just rips it.
I digress. I'm not here to pick on Tuch. I've done that enough in past episodes just because.
But he's a good name to bring up because that is the name I'd be calling about if I were another GM. It's like, where are you at on him? Because that is a guy that teams would love. Like I think of like Hannafin in Vegas last year, right? They acquire him and they sign him, right? Like a team would acquire him and just want to sign him in the summer and really keep that guy around for a while. He'll be 30 when that next contract kicks in, but you give him 5 years, 6 years, 35, 36. His body isn't holding up great, right? He gets dinged up a lot, but I think his game translates to those years. But yeah, in terms of leadership on ice, like what you're giving up, it's hard to picture you winning that. But hey, again, like I said with Cousins, bring something to the table. I'm not hanging up the phone, but there is an importance of a guy like that. The enthusiasm he had about being here, some of which has waned, obviously, right? Like he's not quite as excited as the Sabres fan that joined a few years ago. He's got some scars now, but as long as he wants to be part of the solution, you put a letter on him.
He became a father here.
He did.
In this
I mean,
town.
he's 2 hours away from his hometown.
2 hours away from his, you know what I mean? My only thing is like, has losing become too comfortable for Alex Tuch with the Buffalo Sabres? I think he hates to lose, but it's a question. I mean, it's worth thinking about, because if it has become acceptable for him, then that's the biggest reason why he would come off of that untouchable list.
I don't feel.
Do you know
like
what I'm saying?
Yeah, like I think guys get lulled into that, right?
Yeah.
They would never say it, and they may not even know what it feels like, but all of a sudden losing just becomes a thing, right? And
yeah,
I think that I was actually going to bring up sort of the opposite, is that Tuch, look, like I said, he hasn't had one of these mega contracts. So this is going to be a big moment for him to figure out what it looks like. But he's going to, let's say he's looking at a 6-year, $42 million contract offer from the Sabres, right? I mean, that's rich, right? That's $7 million a year.
It's the term. Yeah, man. It's a lot of term.
He's got leverage.
No, he does. So that's what right? Trust me. He's earned that ask. If that's like, if he asks in that neighborhood
say, hey,
of term
I want an extra term. Let's even say it's a 5-year, 35, right?
And by the way, am I being hypocritical by going at that when we just spent all this time talking about you got to sign Zucker yesterday? I might be.
Right.
I don't know.
But let's say he's looking at that, right? And he's weighing, wow, 6 years, 42 million, 5 years, 35, whatever it is. Where am I going to get this money? Like, this money's here right now, right? Let's say it's this summer. This money's here right now. And it's, my last big chance to cash in, other than if he goes to UFA, but that's another year away, 30 years old. Maybe the calculus is different. The cap is going up, though. So he could get, but maybe he doesn't get that 6th year. Maybe he doesn't get that 5th year.
A third line winger, those dollars. Right. Because it's like, where do you put him in the lineup when he's 32, 33 years old? Right, is he going to be a Zucker at 33 on your top line? But you're also the last place team in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah. So he's looking at that and he's thinking, where else am I going to get this, right? And can I count on it being here a year from now? You just never know with all these things. But then he's also probably sitting there getting ready to put pen to paper thinking, I'm going to be 35 or I'm going to be 36 when this is done. I probably won't be playing beyond that. Maybe he will. Who knows? Just given the way he gets dinged up, I wonder. And he's thinking, this is it. This is my hockey career. Am I going to be able to win a Stanley Cup?
Well, he's also saying that it's never going to get worse than it is right now.
Well, there's that. But to your point about, like, has he accepted? I think it will cross his mind looking at it saying, do I have a real chance to win a Stanley Cup? Yeah. Do I believe that I can win a Stanley Cup? Because I do think that would be important to him. Now, we'll see. I think that he becomes a fascinating piece of the puzzle for all those reasons. And the reason he's a good name to bring up, but kind of like the other guys too, is that there's not a rush, but they're going to get calls.
Got to make hockey trades, or at least look at it. I think everything's got to be on the table. That was my point. And look, my thought about just asking the question, the conceptual question about Tuch, and it's a reflection of the culture that has seeped its way in to the Sabres organization over the last decade plus. Started with losing on purpose, and they haven't escaped it. Let's face it. Let's call it what it is. But Yeah, I was just kind of curious. I just want to throw that out there. I don't necessarily feel it about Tuch. I see him out there, talking to you guys after the games. He's bothered by the losing. I don't think he's accepted it, but it's just in the back of his mind, because
I
this
think
has been a pretty comfortable place for players to be, despite the lack of results and no playoffs.
I think he's drained by it, so I
Yeah.
think it can be easy to kind of misconstrue at times. It's like, has acceptance set in? Is he burnt out? Is he drained? All those things. Everybody's different too, right? Everybody speaks to reporters differently, and he's pissed about losing.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty comfortable saying that he has not. Now he's kind of the upbeat, positive guy, right? Like, so some people will read some of his quotes. Like, I spoke to him during the streak, and he was talking a lot about, some of the work he does off the ice and all this stuff. And a lot of people were thinking like, man, like that, it's kind of like with Zucker saying he tries to bring a positive attitude. It's like, because the opposite doesn't help, right? Like, you can be pissed, but to a point, that energy doesn't always help. Like, Dylan Cousins was really pissed off. He's not playing much better.
That's what I'm thinking.
So,
okay, you know what? It just dawned on me that I think I conveyed the thought incorrectly. Honestly, it's does Alex Tuch have that ability to be the guy that won't accept it and turn it around with
right, drag the team out of it. That's
that. It just dawned on me, like, 'cause it didn't feel right when I said it, but I was like, we're here. I said it. Can't undo it. I'm not going to edit this video. You know what I mean? But I think that's what I was trying to get at. Anyways, sorry.
No, I think that's a fair point. It's part of why I have Darlene on the untouchable list is he seems so angry about it that if he's going to spend every day of that contract trying to pull this team out of it and drive himself crazy in the process. And you do need an element of that. Like, everybody can't just be coming all, upbeat and fired up every day. Like, somebody's got to crack the whip and there's and Darlene's that guy. Like,
I genuinely feel it with Darlene, and I'm not down there just from watching, on X after the game or whatever, the player interviews, or on TV or whatever. I feel it. You're down there. You definitely have to feel it if I feel it from afar. Let's stop there. I didn't think we went almost an hour and a half. We're an hour and 22 in. We haven't done this in a while. Good discussion.
It's good.
Good discussion.
A lot of meat on the bone there.
Shit, there is. And we didn't even get to the big one. I think that we've talked a lot about on the ice, players on the ice. I think there's a conversation. Maybe could be next episode. I think we have to have a standalone episode about, the off the ice team and the bench and the future and leadership. You kind of touched upon it. You sprinkled a little bit on there. I was like, don't go. Let's not go there because my bladder's full and I don't want to be here another hour. But no, Sabres play today at 4:00. Bills had a big win yesterday. I think most of the folks in here are Bills fans. Should I get a prediction from you or should no? Let's get together before. Let's get together before.
It's a little early.
Yeah, let's get together before. Chiefs opened up 1.5 favorites, by the way. I don't think the line. I haven't looked at the line.
So
I think that's a good line.
It's almost like the Bills would be favored on a neutral field. So
yeah, the Bills opened up 1.5 favorites last week, Sunday. To me, that line should have been like half a point. It basically made it a money line game. By closing, actually 24 hours after the lines opened, the Ravens became 1.5 favorites. So the Bills yesterday were home dogs. Yeah, tons of money. But I mean, hey, Baltimore had a great season, but big win by your Bills. Hopefully the idea was today that we started at the right time. We got Matthew working a little bit pressed up against, because Matthew has to work the game. Didn't want to go too early. Maybe some of you were at the game or hung over even if you're watching from home. Hopefully we started at the right time. We thank everyone, as always, for opting in here. It's been a tough season. We totally get it. We're going to keep, trying to dissect things, do some surgery, have dialogue, agree, disagree, whatever. I see the chat was moving today. Sorry we didn't get to any of your chats. But at any rate, I think that's it. Matthew, in closing, plugs, final thoughts, floor is yours.
Yeah, head over to The Athletic and fill up my mailbag with your questions. Whatever we didn't get to today, feel free to throw in there. I'll be answering those. Possibly a two-parter. We'll see how many questions are in there.
All right. For Matthew Fairburn, for the production crew out in my driveway that was freezing watching the game. I didn't let him in. Didn't let him in the house yesterday. I kept him out in the driveway, had him getting ready for today's Baker Fairburn hockey show. They had it on in the van, the Bills game. I'm Kris Baker. Thanks everyone for hopping in as always. Hit that like button if you haven't already on your way out, and we'll see you again next time.